grading papers and so on right now. Here you have on the screen on the left side a traditional picture of the Virgin Mary with Jesus, traditionally believed to be painted by St. Luke the Apostle and brought to India by St. Thomas. There's no verification for that historically, but certainly it shows the piety of Mary and Jesus go way back to the earliest days of Christianity. And then an old and I find somewhat charming image of Sri Lakshmi with the elephants in the background. She's standing there in the lotus. And in a sense, you see what the Course is about by looking here, that you see the Divine Mother, you see the Blessed Virgin together, and then begin to think about how they interrelate, how we can compare and contrast them, and so on. So that's where we start. I should also say at the beginning that in the Course, I identified a number of themes that I think are timely. And again, we can talk about these or not. It depends really on what seems best when I finish talking. It's a comparative course. So the first thing I would say is that one expects that when one compares, let's say, Mary and the goddesses, another course I teach, Krishna and Christ, you will find similarities and also find differences. And I think both the similarities and the differences are of interest. So when I notified the course and put together the syllabus, I made these 7 points as relevant to the nature of the course. Getting to know Sri Lakshmi, the eternal consort of Vishnu, Mahadevi, the great goddess, Abhirami Devi, the Tamil goddess, and Kali, here I call the dark mother goddess. So 4 goddesses of the many that could be talked about are central to the course. Obviously, the Virgin Mary, issues related to gender, sexuality, to goddesses and Mary. What does it mean to be a woman and to be a divine woman? What does it mean for Mary to be a virgin and a mother at the same time? Was a theme throughout the course. We can agree, I'm sure, that goddesses are essential to Hindu traditions. They're everywhere in Hindu traditions and very important. And Mary is essential to Roman Catholic and Orthodox Christianity. Some of the Protestant churches have less of a role for Mary, though no disrespect. But the Eastern churches, the Greek Orthodox, the churches of Kerala, and then the Roman Catholic Church see Mary as very important. So these are big figures in the traditions. A sub-theme number 4 was what's the difference between a god and a goddess? And it's fairly easy to say the male and the female. But when we talk about the supreme being, is there anything lacking to the greatest of the gods and the greatest of the goddesses? Are they not in some ways the same perfect being? And how seriously, literally, do we take words like God and goddess? It's a little different with the Virgin Mary. Mary is not a goddess in Catholic tradition, but she is the mother of God. Not simply the mother of Jesus, but the mother of God. How do we think about that as well? Mary as both a mother and a virgin. And this is kind of a tradition that goes way back to the beginning of the Catholic and Christian churches, that Mary is truly the mother of Jesus, and that she remained a virgin, that she was blessed by God with the Holy Spirit and brought forth a child, but in a remarkable fashion. And so Mary is often called the Virgin Mary, Virgin Mary, Mother of God. One of the themes that comes up in the course we'll see later is Mary in India, Mary in Indian tradition, and also the goddesses in America. So when we cross over back and forth, we think goddesses in India, Mary in the West, but it also can be goddesses in the West and Mary in India. And then a larger question, which we may or may not get to, do goddesses and Mary have any relevance in a culture where the very idea of divine persons is no longer predominant? A somewhat secular culture. Pope Leo, in just a homily that he gave yesterday or the day before, yesterday, I think, when he was meeting again with the bishops, he talked about we live in a culture where for many people, they're not in doctrine, but in practice atheists. They may not believe in any divine being or act as if there is no divine being. So if we have a culture in which neither the divine male or female matters, how do we still learn from Mary and the goddesses? So those are themes that I brought into the classroom in the course, and they figure now in what follows in my number of slides that I'll put forward. There are only about 14 more, and then we can stop and talk about it. So we began the course by some books about goddesses in the Indian tradition and Mary and Christian tradition. This is a very fine book if you've never seen it. Hindu Goddesses, Visions of the Divine Feminine in Hindu Religious Traditions by David Kinsley. So about 40, 50 years ago even, David Kinsley, a professor, he was one of the first among American academics to try to give Americans an understanding of the goddess traditions. There are about 7 or 8 goddess traditions in the book, ranging from Lakshmi to Kali to Mahadevi, to some of the local goddesses of South and North India, Durga, and so on, Parvati, Uma. And he tries to explain them in a way that he thinks the general reader can understand. So for the background, this book has been very helpful, and I asked the students to read the book as part of the course. And parallel to the book, another very fine little book by Tim Perry and Daniel Kendall, a book called The Blessed Virgin Mary, a book of only about 100 pages, but it gives kind of an introduction overview of what Mary has meant in the tradition of the church. And for many students, they would have no background or not sufficient background either on Mary or on the goddesses. And so looking at these two books at the beginning of the course, Kinsley and Perry Kendall, also is very valuable just to get started in the nature of the course, and you may find them useful as well. I should also point out that Daniel Kendall, who's a Jesuit, was a Jesuit, he's deceased now, is a Roman Catholic, and Perry is a Protestant. And part of the theme of the book was how do Catholics look at the Virgin Mary and how do Protestants look at the Virgin Mary? And it's a nice part of the book that they cover that theme as well. So we started with those two books, and then we went through a series of sections to the course related to the different figures that we treated, beginning with Sri Lakshmi, a text called the Sri Gunaratna Kosha by Parashara Bhattar, around the 11th, 12th century South India Sanskrit, in which he praises in 62 verses Sri Lakshmi as the eternal partner of Vishnu, and that wherever Vishnu is, Lakshmi is there as well. She is the glory of Vishnu. She is the motivating force that gives him his power. She inspires him to action. And wherever Vishnu is, Lakshmi is. When he comes into the world, let's say as Rama, she will come to the world as Sita, and that the two of them are always together. And it's an interesting text because it's very much still honored in Sri Vaishnavism in South India, particularly at Sri Rangam, the great temple Sri Rangam, some of you have been to, I'm sure, right outside Trichy, where there is a shrine to Ranganatha, Lord Vishnu, and another shrine to Sri Lakshmi. And this hymn was composed at the shrine there at Sri Rangam. So we go through this and we read it carefully with some of my own writing to go with it. And these are just the first two verses. I'll give you with each of the texts a couple of verses, and we can come back to them if you want, because they're meant to be read kind of spiritually with a certain meditative force. So I'll read them slowly before moving on. Before Sri, whose approving glances are making efficacious Hari's intention to bring order to all sentient and insentient beings, I offer a respectful salutation. The play of her briefest glance as it buds supports the 7 worlds as they sprout due to her splendor, under her protection. She is the flame of an auspicious lamp in the Sri Rangam Palace, queen of Sri Rangam's king, Sri, and with her we take refuge. And all the texts that I use in the course have this element of taking them to heart and turning with respectful salutation, taking refuge. And this beautiful hymn to Sri, I think, captures some of that devotion. Going to Sri, Lakshmi, being helped and protected by her, and then being with her and with Vishnu, Narayana at the same time. So we spent a few days on this text, reading it, talking about it, reading it aloud even, which I think was a beautiful idea as well. And then we moved on to a parallel text from the Greek church called the Akathistos hymn of the early Greek church in honor of Mary as the Mother of God. And all the texts that we deal with on the Christian side are in praise of Mary as the Mother of God. It's a way of giving her a special status without claiming that she is the goddess. Um, if she was not the mother, then there would be no Son of God in the world, no incarnation, no Jesus on earth. So she has this great status. And this hymn, composed in the early church in the East, um, is still sung during the church year. For instance, the Lenten season, which finished only a few weeks ago, every Friday they sing parts of this hymn during the Lenten season, usually in Greek, but in this country, sometimes in English. You can find on YouTube. The word akathistos means not sitting down, and the hymn is considered so sacred that people will stand while the hymn is being read. And so this one begins and goes for 24 verses in this way. An angel prince, Gabriel, was sent from heaven to say, Hail to the Mother of God. And when she saw you, Lord, take body by his word that had no body, he was moved to ecstasy and stood there, crying to her this greeting. Hail, by you gladness will shine forth. Hail, by you the curse will end. Hail, writing of the fallen Adam. Hail, ransom of Eve's tears. Hail, height not to be scaled by human reasoning. Hail, depth inscrutable, even to angels' eyes. Hail, you are the king's seat. Hail, you carry him who carries all. Hail, star making the sun to shine. Hail, womb of the divine taking flesh. Hail, by you all creation is renewed. Hail, by you the creator became a babe. Hail, unwed mother. The word here, kaire, or hail, is a greeting word. It's also a word of blessing, a word of happiness. And all through the hymn, you have at least 140 uses of the word hail, ways of greeting the Mary, as in the West we say the Hail Mary, reading, honoring, praising Mary for the powers that she has, as I just read. And then the angel Gabriel speaks to Mary, and she speaks. The Holy One, seeing herself to be chaste, said boldly to Gabriel, the paradox in your word appears to my soul very hard to accept. When you foretell that I will bear a child conceived without seed, and then you cry, Alleluia. This is the beginning of the hymn altogether, only the second verse, but it goes on to talk about the angels talking further with Mary, the Holy Spirit coming upon her, bearing the child, fleeing with the baby and her husband Joseph to Egypt to escape King Herod, and then what Mary found, and she found Jesus to be as part of her life, even to his death on the cross and resurrection. And again, it's a text to be read. There are beautiful settings of it online. You can find on YouTube. If you look at Akathistos hymn, you can find settings of it to listen to, because I stress to the class that honoring Mary according to the early Greek church is really a kind of prayer to hear, to meditate on, to think about in some depth. So we compare these two texts, the Akathistos hymn and the Sri Runa Gunaratna Kosha, back and forth, Lakshmi and Mary, because Mary is not always the same and the goddess is not always the same, but we put these together as a pair. Then we moved on to the next pair. This is a very famous hymn that I'm sure some of you know, the Soundarya Lahari, attributed to Shankaracharya, 100 verses in honor of the great goddess Mahadevi, Maheshwari, one of the supreme goddesses that one meets and encounters in Indian tradition. And the title, Soundarya Lahari, is the wave or the ocean of beauty. One part of the text is called the ocean of bliss, because the goddess, when she looks upon you, gives you bliss, makes you blissful. Another part is about her beauty, head to toe, and so you meditate on her and see her beauty. This scene in the picture is really represents the end of the text, where Mary, where the goddess is sitting on her throne giving a blessing, and she somehow is resting on her husband Shiva. He is like the cushion, he is the foundation on which she rests. There are to the two sides of her different goddesses like Lakshmi and Saraswati, and different smaller deities down at the bottom. And for the students to listen to the hymn, we play the Sanskrit, and then to think about who she is as the great goddess who is of great, great power, begins to give a sense of the greatness of the goddesses. This one begins with a very clear theme of this greatness. Only joined with power, Shakti, has the god power to rule. Otherwise, he cannot even quiver. And so you are worthy of adoration by Hari, Hara, Virinchi, and all the rest. So how dare I, who've done nothing meritorious, even reverence and praise you? As you know, Hari, Hara, and Virinchi, Hari is Krishna, Hara is Shiva, and Virinchi is Brahma. So the Trimurti, Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. They are barely able to worship you. How can I do that? Brahma gathered the tiniest speck of dust from your lotus feet and fashioned worlds lacking nothing. With much effort, Indra carries the same on his 1,000 heads. Shiva pulverizes and rubs it on like ash. Even a speck of dust from your foot is enough to create the world. For the ignorant, you are the island city of light illumining their inner darkness. For the dull-witted, honey streaming from the flower banquet of consciousness. For the destitute, a double for the wish-fulfilling jewel. For those drowning in the ocean of births, the tusk of Mora's enemy, Krishna. The boar lifting them up, that's how you are. And again, for students reading such words, they're a prayer and addressed directly to the goddess. You get a sense of both the idea of the goddess, the story of the goddess, and also invitation to enter into praising the goddess. And I think the students in the class, even when they were not Hindu, were quite willing to hear and to participate to some extent in pondering who the goddess is. And so we use this text, all 100 verses, took a while to go through. And then we turn to a short text. Some of you may know this if you have any Catholic experience, the Stabat Mater. And this is a text of the Virgin Mary at the cross of her son, Jesus. So from the medieval church, it's not clear who the author is, but it's 10 verses that are often sung in the Lenten season of Mary standing at the cross, and then Mary being the intercessor who will enable people to reach Jesus, from the cross to Jesus, from Jesus to the cross and to Mary. And it begins very beautifully with a sad scene of Mary looking at her son on the cross. And I'll just read again these 3 verses. The sorrowful mother was standing in tears near the cross as her son was hanging there. And through her sighing soul that shared his sadness and was sorrowing, a sword pierced. Oh, how sad and afflicted was that mother of the only begotten, as he was bewailing and sorrowing and trembling, as she stood looking upon the punishments of her renowned son. Who are those who would not weep, should they look upon the mother of Christ in such a moment? Who would be unable to share the sadness of the Holy Mother, to contemplate her sorrowing with her son? One of the important points about this pair, the Soundarya Lahari, the Ocean of Beauty, and this, the Stabat Mater, Mary at the Cross, is that they have a different feel to them. This one obviously is very sad. Her son is dying on the cross. She is there. By the end of the hymn, the devotee is praying to Mary, you who suffered with your son, help me in my suffering. But the Soundarya Lahari is a sim of bliss and joy and happiness. And part of it was to remind me and our students that it wasn't simply the goddess and Mary are the same, but sometimes the goddess can be full of bliss and Mary full of sorrow. And the experience in life, that sometimes we have bliss, sometimes we have sorrow. There are different ways in which the goddess and Mary can speak to people. And it's important, I think, to be able to see the differences, even though both hymns are very powerful and saying, Shri Devi, you can help me, you can care for me, Mary, you can help me, you can care for me, and back and forth between the two in a second meditative part of our course. Then we have a third pair. Let me get to that. The third and final pair of text. So we go to South India, Tamil Nadu. One of the things I did in graduate school was learn some Tamil. And I've spent time frequently in Madras, Chennai, and Point South, Srirangam, as I mentioned before, and so on. But many years ago, maybe 25 years ago, I noticed there was one little booklet always available in bookstores, the Abhirami Andadi. Now, the Andadi, Anta Adi, beginning end, is a certain style of poetry I don't need to explain now. But Abhirami means the beautiful one, and it's a hymn to Abhirami, who's Parvati, Uma Parvati, the consort of Shiva. And the story is that there was this man named Abhirami Bhattar, which could mean the devotee of Abhirami, or the Bhattar, the Brahmin, who's a devotee of Abhirami, that he was from early childhood infatuated by the goddess, and that he could only see her in his life. He would pray to her all the time. She was always there, and other people couldn't see her. So finally, the king comes to visit, and the king is skeptical, saying, this man is a fool. He's pretending. He doesn't know what's going on, and challenges Abhirami Bhattar, will there be a full moon tonight or a new moon? And the king knows that there'll be a new moon, and so it'll be very dark. The moon is barely appearing. But Abhirami Bhattar, who's filled with the light of the goddess, he says the moon will be full tonight, because whenever he looks, he sees the light of the goddess. And as the evening comes in the dark and the king is mocking him and getting angry at him, suddenly the light of the goddess appears and fills the entire place where the king and Bhattar and the other people are. And the king becomes a devotee, seeing that Abhirami Bhattar, in fact, sees the goddess in the way other people cannot. So it's very existential and very much a matter of feeling. And then in that context, Abhirami Bhattar suddenly sings 100 verses. He sings 100 verses in honor of Abhirami, the goddess, and they all come pouring out at once, like a garland of verses. And he praises her fully in this way. And it begins this way: rising, bright, radiant, auspicious mark on high, jewel prized by the discerning, pomegranate bud, splendid vine praised by the woman on the lotus, pool of fragrant kumkum paste. Thus is your form described, Abhirami, ever my best help. My help, the divinity I worship, my own mother, the sacred words branch, shoot, spreading root. In your hands a fresh flower club, cane bow, tender net, goad. O beautiful lady of the three cities, you're all I know. I know the secret no one knows, and knowing it, I clasp your holy feet, O Holy One. Afraid I've kept apart from people who don't know the greatness of those who love you. Blocked by their own erring hearts, they tumble into hell. A little bit different from the Sri Guna Ratnakosha and the Soundarya Lahari, the two texts we just looked at. When we get to this point in the course, the students always notice it's very personal. So the author is very personally involved. He has the experience. He finds her to be his mother. He knows nothing else, and he puts himself at her feet. And I think it's important that the theology of the goddess as mother, is in this case, and I think for many devotees, I'm sure many of you, become very personal and existential, where being in the presence of the goddess is consoling. And Abhirami Bhattar, more than many of the poets, show in the 100 verses how beautiful and how important Abhirami is in his life. And then I compare this with another text, a Tamil text in the Catholic tradition, which is a very unusual text, the Madhara Samanandadi, which I printed in my book, A Divine Mother, Blessed Mother, 20 years ago. But no one else has really worked on this text. It's about Mary, mother of Mylapore. So those of you who know Madras, Chennai, the old part of the city with the many temples, the many learned people teaching the scriptures and so on, is called Mylapore. And at the end of the 19th century, this gentleman, M. Appasamy Mudaliar, he composed 100 verses in honor of Mary as the mother of Mylapore. So not Mary, mother of Guadalupe or Lourdes or Fatima or somewhere in the West, but his own town in South India, saying, she is the mother. She is here. And it's a very beautiful text. We don't know much about it because even Catholics in Tamil Nadu couldn't tell me much about it. I found it myself. But there is in the picture a church honoring Mary that goes back to just about over 1510, maybe. When the Portuguese first came to that part of India, they built a chapel which is still standing there with, as you can see, Mary with her child, Jesus. And doesn't directly go with the hymn, but it's the same sentiment of Mary as part of Tamil culture. And so I wanted to look at this with the other Andadi, Abhirami, because they're in the same style and each of them is 100 verses. And this one begins beautifully too. The poet singing to Mary, you bear your jewel, the highest one, jewel of my eye, creator, preserver, destroyer of the echoing sea and earth, the underworld and the pure, bright, jeweled world beyond. You wear the sky jewel sun as your garment. Graciously grant my wish to sing in praise of your feet, O Queen among women in great Mylapore. Queen among women in Mylapore, surrounded by Madhavi groves, Mary, the great mother whose dwelling touches the moon. If I praise her feet, so honored in this world by great ascetics, then with eyes like unfading Kuvalai flowers, that fragrant, fine one will glance upon me. And what's beautiful here is that in both the Abhirami Andadi and then the Madhurasama Andadi, it's very South Indian. The idea of being at the feet of the goddess, being devoted to the goddess giving you joy in the beautiful place we're in. The devotee wants to put themselves down before her feet. And here, in honor of Mary, the same thing. If I praise her feet, then she will glance upon me and she will set me free. And again, reading back and forth between the two, I think is a good thing to do because any of us might be rooted in the Mary tradition or the tradition of one or another goddess. And yet to read the other back and forth can be a good spiritual exercise. And we can talk about this too to see if it makes any sense. So that was the third pair of texts that were in my book 20 years ago, Divine Mother, Blessed Mother, and that we used in the course this past semester. But in the course of teaching, I added some other texts. Most famously, I added texts about Kali. And I know many of you participate regularly in the worship of Kali. And this is a beautiful collection of translations of Kali hymns by Rachel McDermott. And Rachel McDermott is a great scholar. She's at Barnard College at Columbia University. And she grew up, her parents would bring her regularly to the Vedanta Society in New York, on the Upper West Side, where Swami Sarvapriyananda is now. Years and years ago, she's probably in her 60s now, Rachel McDermott. So she grew up as a Christian, practicing Christian, with also familiarity with the Kali tradition and great reverence for Kali. So in this book, she's a scholar, but she's also trying to show in a beautiful form the hymns to Kali and Uma, both the horrible images that you can see, like holding the head on the cover of the book, but also Kali is the mother. And many of you know much about this, so we can talk about this as well. But bringing Kali in seemed to be a valuable addition to the course. We also mentioned this book, which I think many of you will know quite well, Sister Nivedita's book, Kali the Mother, which is both about Kali and a beautiful prayers to Kali from early in the Ramakrishna tradition. And so giving a sense of the feel of the tradition itself, Kali and Mary, different goddesses, Mary in different forms and different languages, was really the heart of the course, back and forth, back and forth. One of the things, though, that I did, and I'm almost done, and then we can talk about it, is slow down and read the text together and I won't do this now, but we can come back to it if you want. And again, I can send you this note, is here putting on the page verses that I read from the Abhirami Andadi on the left side and the Madhura Samandadi on the right side, and simply to basically print it out and stare at it and read one column and then read the other column and then read back and forth. You could even, if you're with other people, take turns reading the left column. One person reads one verse from the right column, another verse from the left column, another verse from the right column, kind of in a spiritual exercise, like I know at the center there in San Diego and elsewhere, you're quite comfortable with this ability to read across the boundaries of traditions. But again, I won't go through it now, but it could be like the text for an hour or a half hour of prayer, just to take these verses in honor of Abhirami and Mary and read them together, realizing they're both from Tamil, both from South India, and both filled with devotion. But the course ends, and I will end, with going to places. And we went to two places, one of which is Velangani. And those of you who've been to South India know that this is the great shrine of Mary in deep South India. So instead of dealing with the text, simply with the poetry that I've been dealing with in most of the course, we kind of get out the map and look at Velangani, which is about 100 miles or so south of Chennai on the coast of Tamil Nadu. And the stories are that in the 16th, 17th century, Mary had some apparitions here. She appeared to peasant boys, boys who were in trouble, boys who were very poor, and she identified herself as their mother. And so devotion began. And another story was Portuguese sailors were off the coast right at that spot, and their ship was going to sink in a terrible storm. And they cried out and said, Mother Mary, if you save us, we'll build you a shrine on the beach. And according to the tradition, so they did. And so this shrine is the most popular Catholic place in India. They say 1 million devotees come here every year for worship to Velangani. And they do traditional South Indian things, like some, as a vow, shave their heads, men and women both. They bathe in the pool or in the ocean. They fast. They say prayers. Some even you see rolling themselves along the ground up to the shrine of Mary, asking for health or protection or healing. But wanted to give the students a living sense of what is it like to pray to Mary, and then to pray to Mary in South India. And many of the prayers at Velangani are in different languages, English, Malayalam, Konkani, other languages, but many are in Tamil. And to be able to see Mary praised locally. And for those who wish, and many Hindus come to the temple as well, to the Shrine of Mary as well, within less than a half kilometer away, there are 2 or 3 goddess shrines. And some people come and they'll go to the church, Mother Mary, and then they'll go to the shrines to Mother Kali, Mother Abhirami, Mahadevi, and so on in the area, different Ammans and so on. So try to give a feel of the living devotion. And then we did finally this remarkable book that came out just recently, Professor Tracy Pinchman, who's a professor at Loyola University in Chicago. She studied what it says here, Goddess Beyond Boundaries, worshiping the Eternal Mother at a North American Hindu temple. And what she does is an in-depth study of a temple in a town called Pontiac in Michigan, right near Detroit. And the temple was founded about 25 years ago when a man, Dr. Kumar from South India, had a strong sense of vocation that Mother wanted him to found a temple in America. And I know the Ramakrishna tradition, you have had many shrines much longer than 25 years ago, and many great devotion to the Mother, to Sarada Devi. So this is nothing new for you, but to have a self-standing temple for the goddess in Michigan, in a largely Christian culture, was quite interesting. And she spent a lot of time in the book talking to people who come to the temple, including people of Indian origin and white Americans, why do you come to the mother? What are you looking for from the mother? And like at the Vilungani shrine, people come for healing, they come for comfort, they come when they have mental distress, they come simply because they're lonely and want someone to pray to. And it was fascinating to think about the goddess in Michigan and then Mary in Vilungani in Tamil Nadu in South India. And so that was the kind of end part of the course. And many of you have anecdotes and stories you could tell about going to temples and going to churches and so on. But all of that gives you some sense of when I take a simple, seemingly simple topic, Mary and Mary and Hindu goddesses, how if you start looking at some beautiful texts and start looking at some of the devotions and the history in different languages, you get a much richer sense of how they're similar and different. So I have just one final slide. What do we learn? And this, I'll just say these things and then we can have discussion, talk. And I think these are just 5 points that I thought may be useful to put on the screen. Hindu goddesses, have much in common with the Virgin Mary. That's, I think maybe we knew that when we started. Hindu goddesses have much in common with the Virgin Mary. However, Mary, Mother of God, is not the same as the goddesses as mothers. So many of the goddesses are mother figures, but Mary, as the mother of Jesus of Nazareth, isn't quite the mother in the same way. And therefore, being the mother maybe is one way for Mary and one way for some of the goddesses. We could talk about differences. Positively speaking, viewing the goddesses and learning about them by reading, by study, by going to temples, helps Christians to appreciate Mary more deeply. So I grew up in the 1960s and 70s when the church was being reformed, the Catholic Church. And there were many people who thought that devotion to Mary was old-fashioned, and that now in the 20th century, 21st century later, that we could have less devotion for Mary because it's not so important. But I think studying the goddesses reminded me how important it is, and how important it is to know the mother, and to have devotion to Mary, not lessened by praying to or noticing and visiting goddess shrines, but rather seeing the goddesses helps me to appreciate Mary. And then I would think, I'm not a Hindu, viewing Mary can help Hindus clarify the identity, the nature of the goddesses and the goddesses as mothers. And that the more Christians know about the goddesses, the better. The more Hindus know about Mary, the better. And the back and forth. And we all can learn much by respectful attention to the goddesses and to Mary. So I think I've given a lot that we could talk about, or any related matters that Swami you'd like to raise, but that was to give you a sense of how I think about this topic, Mary and the goddesses. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Clooney. Beautiful presentation. So I really would love to open this up to a little bit of dialogue with some questions. So from our live audience and also from Zoom. In Zoom, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Can we see the Zoom audience also here? Okay. So Dr. Clooney, let me start off by asking a question here. I just want to also get so we can see our Zoom audience as well. Okay, so Dr. Clooney, let me start off by asking that in your presentation, you mentioned one of the sort of like, you talked about Sri Lakshmi, and you said that how Sri Lakshmi, one of the qualities is that she's the power of Vishnu. So in the Hindu goddesses, sometimes we get this idea that they are the Shakti, of the male aspect there. Is there any, I was looking to see if there's any reference regarding Mary. Is there any similarities of Mary being this quality of Shakti, say, to Jesus, or the power of the divine? Was there any references to any that?
Yeah.
And are the two, is there any equation, compatibility in the sense?
I think maybe not equation, but some compatibility, as you just said. Because in the biblical text, the New Testament text about Mary, there are scenes where it seems that she is the intermediary between her son and others. The most famous scene is in chapter 2 of John's Gospel. They go to a wedding feast in the town of Cana. And when they go to Cana, it's a small town. I think they're poor people. They run out of wine halfway through the wedding feast, and you need more wine. So Mary is the one who intervenes and tells her son, look, they have no wine. And then he thinks about it and stops for a while. And then he makes an abundance of wine, turning water into wine. And that's been taken as a simple scene, one scene only, but it becomes a scene that says if you have something you need, you can go to Mary, who will go to her son for you. So not exactly that she is the power of Jesus or the power of God, but rather that she is the mother, and if you ask her, she will intercede for you. Another way to think about it would be to say that, the incarnation, God coming into the world as Jesus, wouldn't have happened except by Mary saying yes to the angel Gabriel. That she had absolute freedom to say no if she wanted. I don't want to do that. And yet she said yes, and then everything followed with the life of Jesus. Finally, there are passages in the book of wisdom in the Old Testament of the wisdom of God was with God in the beginning. And she permeates the world. She gives energy to the world and life to the world. It's sort of this Shakti power of wisdom. And some spiritual theologians have said, well, wisdom in the book of wisdom is really Mary in the New Testament. So there are inklings of this, but it's not quite the same as saying, the Shakti that gives the God his power.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Just another follow-up question here then is that when you look at the book like of the Chandi, which is really another book about the Divine Mother, and you'll find sometimes that the personality of the mother comes across as both Chandika. There's a ferocious aspect to the mother, and then there's the benevolent side to the mother. So you'll see that in Kali, in Durga. In Mother Mary, are there also different aspects to her personality? So far you described what we would say the more the benevolent side of the Divine Mother. Is there another aspect to her personality?
Yes, we talked about this in class, that particularly when we took up some of the text for Kali, who can be quite frightening at times on the battlefield and so on
Right.
like that. It's hard to find exact parallels with Mary, but there are some clues. For instance, in the Akathistos hymn, the first of the Mary hymns from the Greek church, she is a bulwark against the enemy. She is a shield against those who would attack God's people. She chases the demons down into hell. It doesn't expand on it greatly, but it does seem she has the power to smite the enemies and to drive the enemies away. So that's part of it. And then in many images of the Virgin Mary, and many of you would have seen these in Catholic churches, she's all dressed in blue and she's all beautifully smiling or looking very peaceful. She has her foot on a snake.
Really?
Yes, and the snake is the snake from the Garden of Eden, the snake, that serpent that tempted Eve and then Adam, and God curses the snake and says, you will be crawling around on your belly for the rest of eternity, and they will crush you beneath their foot. And some scholars say, well, it meant that her son would crush the serpent. But all the Catholic churches have, take a look someday, Mary with her foot on the poison snake. And that's it's something to do with a bare foot on a poisonous snake. So a sense of when she needs to be powerful and needs to, cut off the evil to protect her people, she will do so.
Interesting. Where is this image that you just the Mary's foot with the foot on the snake? Where is it?
Well,
Or
it's a popular image. I don't know if I can find one now, but in many Catholic churches, um, the statue of Mary. There's always a statue of Mary in Catholic churches,
I see.
and often I'm just looking on Zoom right now, or Google now, I should say. I'll show you one if I can find it immediately.
Sure. Okay.
Um,
While you're doing that, let me also see. Does anybody would like to ask a question? Why don't you just come up here so that Dr. Clooney can see you?
To answer to your question, Swamiji,
One second, one second.
Well, let me just show you this, and then I can
Sure.
be done with this.
Sure.
So I just went to Google Mary with foot on snake.
Yeah,
And if you do that, Mary in church, foot on snake, you can see in Google all these images with
yes,
her foot on a snake. And I think in many of the churches, you'll see similar ones. Like this is a nice big one. And it's quite common. And surprisingly, people don't even notice it. But
yes,
again, it's quite striking that, again, to kill a big poison snake with your foot is an amazing thing. And that's Mary's often shown doing that.
right, beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Clooney. Let me go ahead and, why don't you come first? What's your name again? Becky. Becky, why don't you come up here so then it's easier if Dr. Clooney sees you, come up here and then you can ask from here. Just sit.
I wondered if you could comment on Mary Magdalene and her carrying some of the more different, some of the characteristics that are associated with the Black Madonnas in the Western tradition and all over the world. And if it's whether she functions as a balance of that image of purity, virginity, birth of Mother of God, with the balancing characteristics on the other side.
Yeah. That's a very interesting question. Thank you for that question. Mary Magdalene is one of the most fascinating figures in the first, in the Gospels. Many say that she was really one of the original apostles of Jesus, and that when in a patriarchal society, she was kind of pushed to the side in the century that followed. But she was there often with Jesus. In one tradition, she bathed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. After the resurrection in John's Gospel, the apostles find the tomb empty and go back home, and she waits by the tomb, and she's the first one to meet the risen Christ. And she has this kind of sense of being a person of the world. One story, which may be unfair, says that she was a prostitute who was possessed by demons and was converted. Others say that was just like negative publicity about her. But the idea that she's a woman of the world, she's a loving woman, that may be in some sense a balance to the Virgin Mary stories. And some of the stories get carried away, like some of the stories you can see online and so on about Mary Magdalene's relationship with Christ as a romantic relationship. Well, there's no proof for any of that, but I think she perhaps represents some of the full-bodied reality of a woman in Jesus's life who was very important to him. So that would be an interesting figure to say, but she doesn't come up in my course really.
Well, wasn't there, I'm not really familiar with the Bible on any kind of level really to talk to you about it, but isn't in the Bible, isn't there things like about Paul resenting her relationship as being a favored disciple or the favored disciple?
Not that I know of, because Paul himself never met Jesus. He became a disciple after Jesus was gone. And I think maybe he met Mary Magdalene, but there's nothing in the New Testament about his meeting Mary Magdalene.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Awad? Sure. Sit down. Thank you.
First, thank you, Father, for that wonderful talk. My question is about spiritual practice. And so, by definition, it's a little personal. And so if I go probe too personally, please, you can stop me at any time. But my question is you spent a long time in the study of Hinduism and obviously have a very thriving spiritual practice as a Jesuit priest. How do you integrate any Hindu Vedantic insights you may have into your practice? And also, if it's not too personal, if you come up with conflicts, how do you deal with conflicts if they both seem like interesting ideas? And lastly, since I don't get a chance to ask you questions very often, Father,
Yeah.
I want to know your opinion of, for me, like the great synthesis book is the Philokalia, which I find to be just a Vedantic text, as it were. But I want to know also your opinion if you've studied like Clement of Alexandria or Origen or some of the people who've kind of fallen out of favor, as it were, wound up in the heretical category, as it were. But how do you, mainly it's about synthesis of practice is my main question, Father.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I think we all have to ask ourselves, what is our spiritual practice? Or is it all in our head or something like that? I mean, one of the things I did, in talking about the course in my presentation was how these are texts you can pray with. You can actually recite them. You can recite them together. You can listen to them being chanted online and so on like that. That the full-blooded, realize these are worship texts. You can go to a church or a temple and hear them there as well. So even to the students saying, we're not just reading materials, but we're entering into kind of spiritual world. I think for me, on a more personal level, I would say that in the past 50 plus years, since I first went to India, I went to teach high school in Kathmandu, Nepal in 1973, and all the boys I taught were Hindu and Buddhist. And I spent 2 years in a very Hindu Buddhist culture. I was always fascinated by going to temples, by places of devotion. The Dakshin Kali temple outside Kathmandu Valley was a wonderful space, even though it is a place of animal sacrifice on Tuesdays and Saturdays. I found it very spiritual as well, and I enjoyed being there. Lakshmi temples in India, Kalighat in Calcutta, though it's always too crowded when I've gone there. Trying to say that in your own tradition, if you're a spiritual person and you know spiritual practice in your own tradition, you can't approach another tradition simply abstractly or intellectually. You have to have some kind of openness to the practice or letting it affect you in some personal way. And so I've tried to do that back and forth. Let me advertise for a moment here. This is a book I just published. I think you can see it here. Hindu and Catholic Priest and Scholar, a Love Story. This book came out less than a year ago, and I talk about my spiritual experience and the back and forth going to India. This picture on the cover, if you're wondering, that's me in the middle, not on the two sides. When I was 24, there I was in Nepal and began to have these kind of back and forth experiences that are still with me. So I've been a Jesuit in the Catholic Society of Jesus for almost 60 years now. And I've been a Catholic priest 47 years. So it's adding up, but all over 50 years, I've also been learning from Hinduism. And I think to answer your question finally about the spiritual practice, so I have read Origen, the Clement of Alexandria, the Philokalia, some of the mystics like the Cloud of Unknowing, Meister Eckhart. Those texts are very powerful, and Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich. But my tradition is that of Ignatius Loyola. And I think it was for Swami a couple of years ago, I did a presentation on the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola, where we're invited into a kind of personal existential envisioning of the life of Christ, and then entering into the story with the imagination, being part of the scene. I mentioned, like at the wedding feast at Cana, imagine yourself in the crowd. Imagine what Jesus looks like. What does Mary say? Imagine drinking the wine that he creates. Or at the cross with Mary, or with Rama, with Krishna, with Kali, in some context, with Ramakrishna. Putting yourself into the scene existentially and then seeing what God says to you in the context is a very Jesuit way of praying. And since the order was founded in 1540, the Jesuits have been visiting other religious traditions around the world all the time. And I think I'm part of that long tradition. But it has to be, I think I'm a professor, so it has to be intellectual. but also has to be spiritual, personal, and a matter of practice as well.
Thank
We
you very
say
much.
finding God in all things. Yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
If I could add one more quick plug, I would say that I did mention your autobiography in the bio data that went out with the email for this talk. So anybody that has to talk can, if they need to go back, they can go back to the email to get the name of your book to order.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Abai. So anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? Let me check the Zoom audience here also. Sometimes, let me see here. Okay, so there's one question. I'm looking at the chat box here. It says, it's from John. It says, as head of the Divinity School at Harvard, do you get criticism from Catholics about being so linked to Hinduism?
Well, one thing, first of all, I'm not the head of the Divinity School. I'm just a professor in the Div School. So I've been at the Div School 20 years now, but I'm not the dean or anything like the dean. So I've been there. But even when I was at Boston College, which is a Catholic Jesuit college about 4 miles from Harvard, where I taught for 21 years before coming to Harvard, there were people who thought we should be friendly today toward other religions, but don't get too involved in learning from them. Just like, make some respectful gesture and then back away, because you don't want to get caught up in the other religion. And I think there are people who thought that about me and still think that about me. Generally in Catholic circles, I think my work is appreciated. I was president of the Catholic Theological Society of America a couple of years ago. I'm a Catholic priest still. I go to parish on the weekends, say mass and so on like that. But still, there are people who say, when they read my books, they're too open, they're too positive, they're too respectful, because they never do anything like that. They know almost nothing about other religions, and therefore are hesitant to think if you are too favorable to other religions, you might convert and become a member of the other tradition. Right. I try to tell them that being, as in my book, the years of studying Hindu traditions have made me a better Catholic. And some people just, are more conservative, more cautious, and they don't like that. But I think it's true. I'm a better Catholic. I'm still a Catholic because of all these years of studying Hinduism.
Dr. Clooney, just when you say better Catholic, maybe can you expand on that? Because we hear this idea. Vivekananda said, in Vedanta, the Jewish can be a better Jew, the Christian can be a better Christian. And I'm curious, what do you mean by better Catholic here?
Yeah, and that's it's a tricky term because who's a better Catholic than somebody else? If you think you're a better Catholic, you're probably not a better Catholic. You're a proud Catholic, maybe. But what I mean to say is that, how do we go from being simply routine members of our religion, where we do certain things because our parents did it before us, or because that's what we do on Sunday morning, and we have books and we have pictures and so on like that. And it's sort of humdrum, where it's sort of the way we are. Now, for me, I was baptized Roman Catholic, so I never converted, never as an adult chose another tradition. I'm sure some people listening in have done that, and that's different. But I think what it is going from being sort of a passive believer who simply does what other people do to being actively on the spiritual path and sort of engaged in it, taking seriously the realities, not simply saying, oh, Catholics believe Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Catholics believe in the Virgin Mary, and so on. Catholics go to Mass, but the spiritual power of these words and the power of the Mass and so on like that. I think going to Hindu temples has made me more appreciative of what we do in church. Hearing Catholic, Hindu chant in Sanskrit has made me appreciate Latin hymns in the Catholic tradition. Studying Hindu goddesses has given me a new devotion to the Virgin Mary, and so on. That kind of thing is what I mean.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Right. Sure, let me just get to a question here, and then I'll get you next. We've got quite a few questions in the chat box here, so let me just kind of read through this. Here was that, from Maria, it's, any thoughts on Mary from the Old Testament and the concept of I can't read that, Selena? Thank you.
Shekinah?
Shekinah, yeah, it's so small.
Well, probably the Shekinah or
I know,
Shekinah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so the first thing is, there's no reference to the Virgin Mary in the Old Testament, period, because she wasn't born then. However, there are many, important women in the Old Testament, women who are spiritual and leaders in the community. So there are other people, but as I mentioned before, the tradition that shows up, I mentioned the Book of Wisdom. Book of Wisdom, that the wisdom of God was with God in the beginning, and she was dancing in the universe and so on. I think it's in the rabbinic tradition, um, and the mystical tradition of Judaism, that this power of God, the Shakti of the divine person, is a female power that permeates reality. And I don't know that much about it personally, but it would seem, first of all, to be quite imaginable and could be studied apart from the Virgin Mary, because the rabbis are not thinking of the Virgin Mary. However, when you think of it as a Catholic, saying, well, who is this female power who is present to God from the beginning? Mary, was born in a certain year in Palestine, a Jewish woman of a certain age, but the sense that her gift was there from the beginning and her grace was there from the beginning. I think one could make some parallels. Other people say, don't go in that direction. Think of the Holy Spirit. So Christians believe Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Spirit is this mysterious power of God. It's like, compared to the wind, compared to fire, compared to light. On Pentecost, the Spirit comes down on the apostles in tongues of fire. That power, which in the Greek word pneuma, is a neuter word. Many have said it really is a feminine principle, and that can be thought of as the feminine principle of the Trinitarian God, Father, Son, and Spirit. So I think there are different ways to think about it, but it's hard to squeeze Mary into the rabbinic tradition of the Shekinah.
I see.
But
Okay.
it's related though.
Speaking of the Holy Trio, I mean, sometimes I hear some of the Hindu swamis talking about the Father being equating to the absolute, the Father, the Son being the incarnation, and the other one being the Shakti. Have you any thoughts on the correlation between the two there?
I would say that there are correlations that can be made, but that it has to be done carefully because it becomes very complicated quickly. So the doctrine of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
it was really defined in the Christian churches after about 300 years. And even though there's mention of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, what exactly the New Testament was talking about took serious spiritual scholars and theologians centuries to get exactly that there's only one God,
Mm-hmm.
yet this God somehow has three realities to it, not like three faces, but somehow the one is the three is the one.
Mm-hmm.
And then characterizing that as the Father, who is the creator of the world,
Okay.
and then Jesus, the Son who came into the world as Jesus, and then as in the Book of Wisdom, as in the New Testament, Pentecost and so on, the kind of the invisible power of God working in the world is the Spirit.
Okay.
And that when writers are inspired to write, evangelists or writers of poetry, when people preach powerfully, it's the Spirit of God that has entered them and is speaking through them. So some way that God, even though Christians insist with Jews and Muslims, there's only one God.
Right.
There's a sense that God comes to us in three different ways. But theologians make it very technical and complicated, and to get it right, rather than saying we worship three gods, one God, three persons is a complicated thing to explain. But it opens up three realities of who God is.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much. You had a question? Do you want to ask a question? You got the answer? Okay, all right. You answered a question here from the audience.
Okay.
Thank you. Let me go back to on the chat box here. Let's see. Here it says, well, I think you answered, but this is a devotee asking, Sunni asking, as a baptized Catholic, but practicing the Hinduism, is there any conflict? Is there a conflict? That's what she is. As a baptized Catholic, but practicing the Hinduism, is there a conflict?
Well, that would be, it would have to be decided, each person, whether there's a conflict or not. As I said, I'm a Catholic priest for almost 50 years. I've been studying Hinduism for more than 50 years. I think there's not a conflict between myself being a practicing Catholic and a priest and being a scholar and deeply involved in learning from Hindu traditions. But I could see somebody else saying, on Sunday I go to the church, and then on Saturday I go to the temple and I pray to Mother Kali. I think that could become a conflict. Like, who do you pray to? I think it's easier for a Hindu to say, I pray to Mother Kali, and then I go to the church and pray to Mother Mary or to Jesus. It's easier that way, but Christians are so much of the view, one God only,
Right.
that it could become very complicated. Now, if somebody says, I'm a Catholic and I gain great spiritual benefit by going to the temple, by the darshan, by listening to the bhajans, by being, reverential, I think that's possible without conflict. But if one says, I worship in the church on Sunday and the temple on Saturday, how do you worship twice? I'm not, it would depend on a personal conversation. Like, what does any person mean when they say I belong to two religions at once?
Right. Yeah.
That can be more complicated.
Right. Good. Thank you. We have a question from Bonnie in Texas. Given the Hindu and Catholic reverence of the goddess, what are your thoughts about why, as a society, we elevate the divine but place so many restrictions on women in various religious traditions?
Well, this is a great paradox. I think because we do this, and some of my friends at Harvard Divinity School point this out to me, and Protestants point this out to Catholics all the time, that the Catholic Church is paradoxical, and the Greek churches too, to some extent, that we have this great reverence for Mary, the Mother of God, and the praise of Mary in many different ways, and women are always two steps behind the priests. And the priests have to be men, the deacons are men, the bishops are men, the pope is a man.
Right.
Power in the church is often concentrated in the hands of men. Even though most parishes, people say, they run only because you have women willing to give their time and their love to making the church alive.
Right.
Still, the power is in the hands of men. Some I know, feminist Christians who've left behind what they consider to be patriarchal churches and say, we'll have a women's church. We'll have a church where women are the leaders and men are the followers, or no men at all. So it's a tough issue. And I think, as with the new pope, who's barely said anything yet because he's brand new, a sense of the Holy Father, the Pope in Rome, surrounded by all the cardinals who are men, the bishops who are men, having a true devotion to the Virgin Mary should remind him of the virtues of women, and that there is a way that God has created man and woman equal, and that to only see women as the housewife, the mother, which is very important, I think gets a bit complicated when women say, but God calls me. God is asking something of me, and not to be following behind the men. So it's a complicated issue, but the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, I think, do the same thing. Enormous devotion to the Virgin Mary, and then the men are in the front with their long beards and so on like that, and the women are in the back. And
Right.
in some Hindu traditions, you could see the same. I won't name any names, but
Yes.
where the people in the front are the men, the swamis, and so on, and the women who actually give life to the community are like sort of in the background.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you answered the next question, which is from Mukesh. If you have one piece of advice to the new pope, what would it be?
I could tell him to buy my book and read my book. I guess that would be a starting point. Well, I mean, I think a lot of us, I don't know him personally. I've never had contact with him. Is that to follow in the footsteps of Pope Francis, and that I think he knows that one of the reasons he became a cardinal was that Francis and he were friends. But the commitment to the poor, the commitment to migrants, respect for all people, rich sharing what they have with the poor, being open and rather than closed when it comes to complicated issues in the church, following in the footsteps of Francis. He has to be himself. He can't, be an imitation Francis. He's not Francis II, but to follow the footsteps. The reason I think people may know, why did he take the name Leo and Leo the 14th? Because at the end of the 19th century, Leo the 13th, who was Pope for a long time, he wrote a document called an encyclical letter that's sent to the church about the rights of workers and the dignity of ordinary people, and argued that the church is not on the side of, capitalism and rich people getting richer, but that wealth should be shared with all people and every worker has dignity and so on. So I think he has a certain instinct that Francis has that I think maybe he will instinctively continue, but we're all cheering him on that he follows in the footsteps of Francis. There is a hand up on the screen. Do you see on the screen there's a hand up?
1 second.
Sign off?
Yeah, you're right.
Chandravarkar?
Good, call him up here. 1 second. Ask to unmute. Sainath, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was actually wanting to respond to Dr. Clooney's comment about it being a little easier for Hindus to go to a Christian place of worship. And I think, speaking for myself personally, I'm a Hindu, but there's a local church here in Thousand Oaks, California, which it's the Paschal Balon Church, and they have a little adoration chapel there which runs 24 hours a day. And very often I've gone there to just to sit there. And I think what I find is devotional energy is the same, whether it comes from a Hindu source or a Hindu tradition, or whether it comes from a Christian or a Muslim source. So whenever I go to this adoration chapel, I don't pray to Jesus, I don't pray to Mother Mary, I chant the Gayatri. And I feel supported in that practice. There's a wonderful feeling of being elevated. So I enjoy it. I know my Christian neighbors see me going there because they're heavily involved in the Catholic Church. But uh, this has been so. I think I can speak from my personal experience that it's easy um, for Hindus to jump across the religious divide because there's a commonness to all devotional energy expressions.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And that makes perfect sense. A holy place is a holy place. And you don't go in with requirements, but you go in and you pray as you're called to pray, the prayers you know. I think that's lovely. Thank you so much.
Oh, you
Make sure everybody knows where this place is so that they also can go.
yeah. Well, Thousand Oaks is in between San Diego and Santa Barbara, so we are equidistant from both the Vedanta centers.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's wonderful to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sainath.
Oh, thank you.
There's a couple more questions, Dr. Clooney. So the next question is, it seems that Catholic and Ramakrishna Vedanta both stress celibacy for monastics, but it seems to me that many Catholics see celibacy as a sacrifice rather than redirecting spiritual energy. What's your take on that?
Well, okay, that's another wonderful question and tough question too. I once, when I was at Boston College, had a number of young monastics, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, talking about why they became monastics. And one of the things to talk about was celibacy or chastity. And I think people, have to be honest about that. It is a good and beautiful thing to have a partner and to be in a relationship. And to give that up can be it can be a sacrifice. But I think two things would be in the Catholic Church, there are two forms of being a celibate, like no sexual relations, not marrying. One is it's a rule for diocesan priests. So the priests who run the parishes under the bishop, it's simply a rule of the church that the priest is not to marry. They don't take a vow of celibacy. They're not monastics, but basically, as long as they're functioning as priests, they're not to marry. Simply for the discipline of the church, and has to do with devotion to labor, also economic and financial issues, and so on. They don't marry. The religious orders, so the Trappists, the Carmelites, the Augustinians, like the new Pope is an Augustinian, the Jesuits, I'm a Jesuit, Franciscans in the lineage of Francis of Assisi, Dominicans and others, and all the nuns, the Presentation Sisters, the Carmelites, other Sisters of Mercy, Mother Teresa's sisters, and so on, take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I think the latter group would be more likely to say, sure, it's tough. It's tough to be poor. It's tough to be told by somebody else what to do. It's tough to be celibate, but that it's basically an act of love, not an act of giving something up. So that the commitment to be like Jesus was, who himself was poor, he was obedient to his Father, and by the New Testament tradition, didn't marry, but rather was committed to the work and to compassion for the people. It's a way of life, and it has its own reward. As I think one of the disciples, asked Jesus, "We have given up so much for you. What will we get back?" And maybe Peter was having a bad day and saying, "Why did I bother doing this?" But Jesus says, "You'll have 100-fold." And I think, well, that can be crass, like saying, if I give something up, then I'll get 100 times more back. I think the idea of like overwhelming joy or sense of love, of the commitment to God, that makes somebody able to say it's an act of love. It's not an act of giving something up, mainly.
Thank you, Doctor. So our final question is, from my three, how did Abhishektananda manage dual faith worship?
Okay, good question. So Abhishektananda was a French priest, Henri Lessaux, S-A-U-X, a French priest who was one of the co-founders of a Catholic ashram down near Trichy in India in 1950 or so, Shantivanam, like the grove or the forest of peace. And he was deeply influenced in the 1950s and 60s by Ramana Maharshi, because it was not that far. He went to Tiruvannamalai. He actually met with Ramana before Ramana died, and was fascinated by Advaita Vedanta. And I think he found that as a Catholic and a committed Catholic, he was a Catholic until he died in 1973, he also felt that there was a great opening into the transcendence of God and reality in Advaita Vedanta, Satchitananda, and that he wanted to follow in the footsteps of Ramana and be a contemplative monastic. He wanted to be a sannyasi, and still a Catholic priest. So he would go up to like Gangotri, and there he'd be dressed in saffron robes, barefoot, wandering around like any sannyasi. And then he would, at like 8 o'clock in the morning, he'd get out his mass kit and say mass as a Catholic. And then he'd fly to some conference in Bangalore. And then he'd go back to the mountains and be a sannyasi again, trying to say that truth is truth. And the deepest truth of the Catholic faith meets the deepest truth of Advaita Vedanta. And that at that point, they're not contradictory anymore, but they're opening into the same reality. That's what he tried to do. There's also another monastic from Shantivanam, Bede Griffiths. Many people may have heard of him.
Yes.
Tried to do, in a more pastoral fashion, the same thing of don't be afraid of the other tradition, because if you go deep enough, you'll find that these different traditions begin to meet. And Abhishektananda, Henri Lessaux, is one of the most, leaders of that in the mid-20th century. And as he wrote many books, you can find under Abhishektananda or Lessaux, S-A-U-X, about his experiences and what he was trying to do.
Beautiful. Well, Doctor, thank you so much, Dr. Clooney. It's been a wonderful presentation, and I think it was really just, I think, wonderful just to get an open dialogue about these two great schools, and which we really don't often have a chance to do. So, can you just mention your book again? There's maybe you have it with you. Can you just show it for anybody's? Actually, Dr. Clooney gave a talk about his book, I believe, in the Santa Barbara Temple. So that's called.
Yes, right. If you go to the Montecito site, the convent, they had asked me back in January. I came up there with Swami Maidananda. He drove up with me during the fires. Remember the terrible fires in January? And I gave a talk to the congregation there, which is online.
Yeah.
They can give you about the book and why I wrote the book and my experience in the book.
Right.
Also, Swami, I think you have it, but I can send you the links, like an interview I did and another talk I did with Sarva Priyananda in New York about the book. You may want to share with people.
Sure. So what we'll do is, I think the PowerPoint, if you send it to me, we're going to post the lecture on our website. We can also put the PowerPoint also there, maybe to make it downloadable for anybody who wants to see the PowerPoint with the presentation. So
Okay.
I want
Thank you
to
all.
thank you again so much, Dr. Clooney. Would you like to give a closing chant, any closing prayer that you like? Would you like to say? And before you do that, let me just make some announcements.
Okay.
So next week we have Swami Dhyana Yogananda. He'll be speaking next week, and then we have also following that will be Swami Sarvadevanaji, and then after that Swami Atmarupananda will be coming the very last week of the month. So we hope you guys can plan to attend those. That will be here in person in the San Diego Monastery.
Okay. So I thought what I would do, since the Pope did it the other day, is simply pray the Hail Mary.
Sure.
And also with a special blessing for all mothers listening in for a happy Mother's Day tomorrow. But I'll just do this, the Hail Mary as the Pope did the other day. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Clooney. Thank you, everybody, coming. I will
Bye.
see you next week. Thank you so much.